Thank you very much for coming along in the middle of the day, start of the day. Appreciate all your time coming along. We're here today to discuss the untapped opportunities of podcasting for content marketers. Anybody who's in business and might be listening to podcasts and have seen how enthralling they are. If you're at all interested in the rise of podcasting and why it's just suddenly taken off over the last couple of years, then we've got some great stats, information and advice for you this morning. And we've got three fantastic professionals here. We've got Ben Green, he's the senior multimedia producer from The Guardian News and Media, and also an author of a podcasting book, which he'll tell you a little bit about in a while as well. We've got Max Pepe, who's the founder of Rebelhead Entrepreneurs, which is a podcast and an online magazine for millennials.
For rebel entrepreneurs.
Anybody who's a rebel, got a head and is an entrepreneur. Yeah. Good. We've got Mark Walker, head of content marketing from Eventbrite UK. He's going to be talking a little bit about some of the alternative formats of podcasting, things like Lab and a few other tools as well, and his experiences of using those. So let's have a big round of applause for those who spend the time. Myself, my name is Simon Dunant. I'm the founder of New Rise Digital, a digital marketing consultancy. And the reason that I put this whole thing together was because I was really interested in this trend and some stats that were coming out of the digital market on podcasting. Totally enthralled me, and I spent the last 2 years really looking over that. I also host the Podcast Power Marketing Podcast, which is my research tool to go out and interview business owners who are using podcasting and find out why they did it, what's working for them. And I also interview lots of people who are building new tools for podcasting as well. So there's quite a few new app developers out there that are seeing this rise in podcasting. It's not just listeners, it's not just businesses that are jumping on this trend, but app developers are building some really cool apps to help people share their podcasts, get discovered, and in certain cases monetize their apps as well. My background's in the web technology market. I also spent 6 years promoting independent music artists with my own music marketing company over in Holland for 6 years. I've been pretty much in the online marketing web tech industry for about, actually more than 11 years, but that's probably the main part of my experience. I've actually been podcasting myself since 2006, but I actually published my first piece of audio in 2001. It was a small sports broadcast, and it was actually very, very difficult back then because podcasting didn't really exist. Basically, podcasting wasn't coined, the term wasn't coined, it was just literally uploading some really, really difficult methods of uploading audio on the web with something called Real Player. If anybody is old enough to know what Real Player is, they'll know the horrendous experience that was. And as I say, I focused on the podcasting as a content format in 2015 after seeing all these fantastic trends appear. So one of the key things is why are content marketers turning to things like podcasting as a format? That was one of the reasons that I started up the Podcast Power Marketing Podcast, to interview people and find out why and go out and do some field research. And I actually spoke to quite a number of different people from a whole real varied range of backgrounds. There were some digital marketers, I spoke to an e-commerce business owner, I spoke to a ghostwriter, a remote cooking school that was set up in Italy by 2 US expats. That was a really random one. A wine distributor, an estate agent, and a freelancer. So all of these people in very, very different businesses were all using podcasting, and I wanted to find out why. And here's some of the things that they told us.
The interview, like what we're doing right now, Simon, is an amazing way to get original content. You pull a transcript from any interview you do, and that gives you really all of the raw materials for creating all kinds of unique and wonderful posts.
If I'd spent half an hour writing a blog, it takes me about half an hour and maybe an hour to record each podcast and do the show notes, and I got 20 people to look at it, I'd be amazed. Within the first couple of days, I think Zach's podcast that went live like 3 days ago, we are fast approaching 200 listens at the moment.
And what's the biggest benefit that you think podcasting has brought to your business?
So many, Simon. The number one is our subscribers have created products and services that they want. We haven't had to go, iterating on products, which we still do.
Email marketing is like, what the heck do I say this week? Well, now I can go, hey, here's a new podcast. This is just out, and we had this great conversation. And suddenly I have something to talk about in my email newsletter, and that alone is worth doing.
That's an amazingly magnetic sense of community that you've built around that.
It feels really good. We have had a lot of podcasters come out to take cooking classes and come out to the farm and meet us, and it's just hysterical because they'll say, I recognize your voice. It's so funny to be here.
We've got an app at the moment called Find a Vino, which sort of takes prices from the supermarkets, and it also takes results from competitions and blends them to create a price stack with the best value wines. And what we've done is we're in this new version we're just releasing, or we're just testing at the moment, we've added our podcast feed into it, as well as our news feed and some of the other content that we use.
The other part that's incredibly exciting is the fact that it's just opened up this gigantic world of connections. I can genuinely say that I've made new business contacts, I've made new friends, thanks to podcasting.
Yeah, there's just a few people that have told us what they think of podcasting. And actually, the guys that were on the remote farm in Italy, it's a really funny story. She was doing this Skype call from a phone in the middle of nowhere in Italy to record the podcast with me. And it was very authentic because there was chickens and cockles in the background. It was one of the worst nightmares a podcaster could have because it was the most noisy environment. But it set the scene. And really, that was what made her podcast unique and authentic, was that when people actually turned up at the farm to their cooking schools that they were running at the time in Italy, they got the same experience that they'd heard on the podcast. So that was quite an interesting one as well. And you heard a whole range of different emotions, in fact. People saying they connect with people. You saw people putting some extra content in their app, so it kept people engaged. So this whole diverse range of people we're all using the same format to really connect to people. So why has podcasting suddenly had a resurgence in the last couple of years? Podcasting isn't new. It's actually been around since the early 2000s. It started in 2003. And the actual name podcasting was coined by a Guardian journalist, by Ben Hammersley in 2004. So, it's been around for 12 years as a format, but it's sort of been the sleeping content format. It's had a huge resurgence in the last 2 years. It's been fueled probably by the popularity of a lot of shows in the US. There's obviously how many people here have heard of Serial or WTF? It's a pretty famous US show. There aren't really the same sort of podcasts in the UK, but we're becoming a global community, right? So people are listening to podcasts from all over the world. It's really have borders. There's been a big hunger for alternative content channels to reach new audiences. And things like blogs and social media, as probably many of you will know, it's becoming very saturated. When the blogosphere started way back when in the mid-90s, it was pretty easy to get your blog seen. Now it's very difficult. You have to put a lot of effort into advertising your blog content. It's easier to access, and there's a lower cost for podcasting technology now. Back in the day, in 2001, 2, 3, when I was starting podcasting, I was actually in the music industry, so I had access to a lot of the gear and studios that you could use for podcasting and audio recording. But the average person in the street couldn't afford this professional gear. Now you can pick up a really decent microphone for around about 50, 60 pounds from Amazon. And I'll be going into a couple of recommendations on that a little bit later. But it's very easy to start. And also there's been an incredible growth of mobile devices. I'll show you a few stats around that, which will make your eyes water about how many mobile devices there are in the world now. And the way people are consuming content is also changing as well. We're moving away from reading things to watching things and experiencing things, whether that's coming to a live event like this or watching it on the web. And we've seen a big surge of online conferences as well on things like Blab and Facebook Live. And people are gathering together and having some sort of live experience and getting closer to people again through the medium of the web. And we've also got connected TVs as well. Apple TV now includes podcasts. consoles such as the Xbox 360, you can listen to streaming on demand, music, and podcasts as well, and connected media players as well. But one of the biggest trends, and it probably hasn't happened just yet, but the next 5 years, is going to be the rising trend of the connected car. It's happening in America right now, and in the next 5 years, it's coming to the UK and Europe. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, although they might be in the high-end cars now, that will filter down at some extent and really make its way to most of the new cars that are rolling off the production line. So let's have a look at some of the research. We talked about the rise of the mobile phone. The number of smartphones we've got in use in 2016 really exceeds about 1 billion. And as you see from this chart here, the cost of data here is going down to virtually zero. So it actually costs virtually nothing to deliver the data across a phone network now, which means that we've got mobile penetration going up crazily here to virtually 100% in the West, and certainly Asia and Africa and the Middle East are following behind, which means that virtually everyone in the world, nearly everyone in the world, has access to a mobile phone of some sort. Even Facebook has started developing light apps for light mobile phones in places that never even had mobile phone networks before. So what you'll find is actually when you start a podcast, you'll find some really random people from all over the world listening to you from places you probably never even heard of. Apple itself has surpassed 1 billion subscriptions for podcasts via iTunes. There is more listeners than there are publishers, so that's why this is an untapped opportunity for businesses specifically, is that there are not enough people in the iTunes store for the people who are consuming the content. If I listen to maybe 2 or 3 podcasts, I'll listen to those and then go and find some more. And if there aren't any, I'll feel disappointed. So there's a gap to fill for sure for content marketers. And some of the stats around who's listening. Spreaker Radio, who are one of the leading podcast hosting companies, did a recent survey, and they found that from their stats, because they obviously can see all of the data that's coming into their systems, the people were listening for around about 24 minutes per episode, which was up from last year, 22 minutes. So that's a long time that people are spending with you on a podcast, listening to what you have to say and all of your knowledge, etc. And 32% of marketers, according to a social media examiner survey, said they actually wanted to learn how to use podcasting. Obviously, they saw some of the numbers and wanted to see how they could use that. And Edison Research, who are the biggest US stat company who are measuring, they measure radio, they measure a lot of other online media, but they recently started measuring podcasting. They actually report that around about 21% of the adult population listens to podcasts regularly. It's actually slightly more than that now. That's around about 57 million US adults. And if you have a look at the graph of the rise of podcasting, you can see here back in 2008 we were down to about 9% of the population. 8 years later in 2016 we're at 21%. And that's 24% year-on-year growth from last year. So in 2015 only 17% people were listening. And this year, 21% of people are listening. This is from the Share of Ear report, which is a great one to follow. And the Infinite Dial, I think they do as well, which brings out all these stats every quarter. But that's a huge number of extra people that are listening to podcasts. And in the UK, specifically, we're about 7% of the US market. So Radar are the guys who measure the figures for the UK radio industry. On listenership for UK radio. But surprisingly last year, they just suddenly started measuring podcasting, which is interesting because, for a large company like Radar, who are steeped in history of only focusing on traditional broadcasting, for them to suddenly move into online media was an interesting move. And some of the different areas that people are listening is exactly the same. No real surprise that 57% of people are listening on mobile, given that those figures that we saw previously about pretty much everybody having a mobile device. So who are these people that are listening? If we dig a little deeper, we find that podcast listeners are actually highly educated. Midroll, who are a company who deliver ads into some very large networks of podcasts across the US, recently did a survey of 168,000 of their listeners. And they found that they're highly educated. They found that 22% of the listeners surveyed had an income of $100,000, which is around about £75,000, I think, on the current exchange rate. So these people are leaders and decision makers. If you're earning that sort of income, you're in an influential position, you're either a head of a company or you own a company, but you've got a lot of disposable income. They're also lifelong learners, which is probably how they got to that high earnings. And they have 10 times above the average yearly spend on books. So there are people who want to be educated, there are people who want to find out more and learn from people. And these are some of the things they're buying. They're not spending money on the basics, they're spending money on gluten-free foods, they're buying pet supplies. These are all purchases that are not for people on the red line, these are for the people that have a huge disposable income. They're buying beer, wine, or liquor. So they obviously have very stressed lives to earn the $100,000. And they spend at least $300 on ticketed entertainment. So they're experiential people who want to experience other people, experience life. And they spend a lot on entertainment subscriptions, so they're media consumers. And they also spend a lot on dining out, which again sort of fits in with that human connection. They want to be with other people and experience things with other people. And where are they doing it? They're doing it on planes, on buses, in cars, and while they're jogging. So, these activities where they're actually listening to podcasts are where people are engaged when they're sitting on a bus. They're sitting there listening to you for 24 minutes. It makes sense because they've got time to kill. While they're running, they want to be educating themselves, or whether they're at the gym or passing time. And in the UK, consumption is pretty much similar, with a couple of notable exceptions, which is quite funny. Obviously, sports and travelling is two of the big key areas where people listen to podcasts. But funny enough, in the UK, people listen to podcasts while they're cooking as well. I'm not sure why. Or relaxing or doing nothing, which probably says quite a lot about the UK and US split. So what is the engagement like? We know that people are listening for 24 minutes per podcast, but are they listening regularly? Well, according to Midroll again, 88% of people listen to most or all episodes. That means pretty much everything you put out for a podcast, people are listening to. And if they subscribe to your podcast, you can pretty much guarantee that they will listen to every single episode. And if you've already got episodes out, they'll listen to your entire back catalogue as well. These are really consuming hungry people for content. So it's a very sticky content medium because when you do get people listening, they will stay with you for a long time. As long as you're engaging them with relevant content, they will stick with you. And they'll get alerts on their phones when the next podcast is coming out. And they'll welcome those alerts rather than not welcoming things like pop-ups and advertising. So really content marketers that want to increase their engagement and actually connect with people, this is a great time to start your podcast. And a lot of people ask me about conversions. Do people convert? Well, the thing about podcast conversion is that when you're measuring blogs in terms of content, then you're usually measuring people clicking through on what they're consuming on your blog. And 61% of people surveyed by Midroll said that when they heard a commercial message on their podcast network, they made a purchase of something. And it kind of makes sense because with a blog, it isn't a human contact. It is very much a disconnected contact and a readership, self-owned experience sitting there reading the blog. You're not actually connecting with another human being. You're connecting with the words of another human being. And I think one of the reasons that podcasting is so engaging and assists conversion is really because the person that they've listened to, they trust. And ultimately, if you want people to buy something, then you've got to get to know them, you've got to get to like them, and you've got to get to trust them. And certainly podcasting helps do that. In terms of actual conversions and clicks, certainly there's the opportunity to put links in show notes. But when you're looking at conversions from podcasts, the best way to look at that is assisting the conversion and helping build that trust so that when you ask for people to do something in the podcast and you give them a call to action, you ask them to go to your website or sign up for your newsletter, they'll do it. And if they're subscribing to your website, then you can send them the podcast and you can follow up on that as well. But content marketers who aren't podcasting are definitely missing out on this highly assistive format for conversion. So let's have a look at some of the benefits that podcasting can bring. quick overview. It gives you a new channel for your content marketing and access to some of the areas that you might not have had access to before. If your blog is in Google, great. If your blog is in some listings or it's being promoted elsewhere, great. But there's a huge amount of people that are using iTunes for search. People are searching for content in different topics on iTunes. And if you don't have a podcast, there's no other way to get into the iTunes store and access all those people. There are also other aggregation platforms that are really making waves in the podcasting industry as well. Google Play has just added podcasts to their Google Play store for the Android and Google Play users. That's only in the US at the moment, but it's coming very fast to the UK. And Android is really on the rise. If anybody's seen some of the Apple figures recently, obviously the Apple iPhone is now in decline officially for the first time. And people are looking for alternatives, and there's plenty of Android devices out there. They just don't have iTunes yet, but it's coming, especially in the UK, for Google Play. And it's a personal and authentic marketing channel that encourages a lot of long-term subscriptions, so people will stay with you for a very long time. It's hyper-engaging, helps you boost traffic, build your email list, help drive sales, opportunity to reach educated and more affluent demographics, as we've seen. And it also gives you an opportunity for repurposing your existing content as well. So basically, if you run a podcast, you can get that transcribed into text and use that as blogs. You can cut out into snippets, use quotes. As you saw on the video that we put together, we use a lot of picture quotes as well, with snippets from the actual podcast as well. So it's right for repurposing, and it's great because it's a real conversation that you're having with people on podcasts as well. So it's really authentic. And podcast listeners are happy to hear commercial messages. That's something you don't see every day. But there's new skills to learn. How many people here have actually tried podcasting before? Just a show of hands. Okay, straightforward. Through the panel. I'm really pleased that you guys put your hand up. So, for some people, how many people have actually recorded anything into a microphone before in their lives ever? Okay, there's quite a few of you. But some of you have never even picked up a microphone. So that might be a scary new skill to learn. But writing for audio rather than the written word on the web is something to think about. We all have conversations. I'm having a conversation with you here today. So it's a very natural thing to do. So it's actually not that scary at all. All we have to do for podcasting, in effect, is just record our conversations. They are actually the most interesting. There are a couple of new technical skills in audio editing that you might have to learn. You can also outsource that part of it. Finding the right podcasting equipment and resources. A lot of people who come to podcasting, they come from either the music industry or the radio industry. And not so many come from the business arena because they don't feel comfortable around microphones and audio and stuff like that. But it really isn't hard to find the right equipment now. And think about formatting your show for your audience. If you come from a radio background, you've probably got a lot of experience in working out how to address listeners and putting shows together. But as I'll ask some of the guys on the panel afterwards, the format of the show is important, but it's not that important to have it to Radio 1 standards. Because people really want to hear your authenticity in podcasting. And some of the other skills to learn is things like how to get your podcast distributed to the right networks and stored through iTunes, Stitch Radio, places like Player FM, and now Google Play as well. So when you're becoming a podcaster, if you're becoming a podcaster for the first time, you want to think conversation with your customer. Literally, just think conversations and record your conversations. It's an opportunity to get feedback and answer questions from topics that you discuss. There's a great tool called SpeakPipe, which allows people to actually record on the web their own questions and answers, which you can put into audio form into your next podcast, as if they were a caller on air, effectively on a radio station. So that's a great way to get some interaction. It's an opportunity to build a community of podcast subscribers, and if you have it on your website, it really does drive opt-ins as well through your email list. And it's also an opportunity to interview and chat with some great, interesting guests. I wouldn't have had a reason to invite these fantastic guys here. I wouldn't have had an opportunity to invite all you guys today if it wasn't for starting my podcast. And some of the people that I've spoken to on my podcast, I probably would have never spoken to in my life, but I've had the most interesting conversations with. And the other key thing is that if you have other people in your business that have interesting stories, this is one of the biggest untapped areas of where you can gain content for your podcast, is to interview somebody in another department perhaps that's running the London Marathon, or has an interesting hobby, or keeps pets, or has an unusual lizard for a pet. You might see those as not relevant to your business, but actually they're very relevant to your business because your people are very relevant to your business, and actually your people are very relevant to your customers. And if your customers can get to know your people, then they'll build up a very high level of trust with your brand. Quick overview of some technical audio skills. Really, the digital audio tools that are available now, they're very, very easy to learn. You're only ever going to need to learn some very basic editing skills. If you can write a blog, you can definitely record a podcast. And even if you don't like the technical stuff, and this stuff really scares you and you think, oh, that's totally scary, I'm not going anywhere near that. There are plenty of people that will love audio, and for a very reasonable fee, will just edit your podcasts, and you can just worry about sitting down and talking to your guests. You send off the audio, somebody else sends it back, all nice, neatly packaged. You can upload it to iTunes and you're done. So a quick look at some of the equipment that's involved in podcasting, for those of you who've never done it. Basically, you can create a podcast with your smartphone, your tablet, your laptop, or your computer. If you really want to start a podcast today, right now, and you've got a pair of earbuds and a smartphone, then just fire up the Memo app and start recording some audio into the earbuds. That's absolutely free, and you can start doing that today. You can even edit the audio on your phone, and you can upload it to your website. And in a very basic form, you could actually get started podcasting today. You can also use things like the Samsung C01U Pro, which is a USB mic. You plug a USB cable in the bottom of the mic, the other one into your computer, and you're just talking to it. Simple as that. Pop it on a little stand and you're ready to go. And if you want a little bit of a better quality mic, there's a Rode NT, actually called a Rode Smartlav, which is a little lavalier mic that just clips onto your shirt, and you plug it into your smartphone, and it's about £30 from Amazon, so I definitely recommend that.
Sorry, can you say the name again?
Yeah, it's a Rode Smartlav, so Smart LAV. And it's great because you can take your iPhone on the road, you can clip it to your shirt, and you can record a podcast from anywhere. And there's plenty of other microphones that you can plug into your phone as well. And we'll be talking to Max in a little while about remote podcasting as well. So yeah, there's many low-cost options there. The most popular editing software for editing is free. That's Audacity. You can download that totally free from the web. And Libsyn is the most stable and long-running host that I would recommend for hosting your audio files as well on the web. Quick overview about formats for your show. Just think about your audience and your show appropriately. If you know your customers, you'll know what type of people you're talking to. If you don't, then get out there and network and talk to people and find out what they're talking about and what they want to listen to. For business-to-business podcasts, really they benefit from things like guest interviews, tips, news from your industry. They really want to hear the insider's view of that, and they really want to be growth-orientated. If your audience is consumer-orientated, then you can actually mix that up a bit and have more of an informal sort of showbiz style format. Perhaps even an X Factor for podcasts. I haven't seen that yet, but that'd be interesting. But research your audience first. Make sure you know who you're talking to. It's just like if you were putting any other content out, like vlogs. Just make sure you know who you're talking to and apply your content appropriately. Another thing that really puts a lot of people off podcasting is they think, if I look up podcasting on the iTunes store, some people have 500 shows. Like, 500 shows? That's an enormous amount of shows. It's like, I'm not sure I could ever do that. Back on the video that we saw earlier, I spoke to Harry Hawke from Inbound.org, one of the biggest marketing networks in the world, I think. He actually started up a podcast for the Inbound.org guys, and he started a series of 16 podcasts, and he said, we're just going to do 16 podcasts and see where it takes us. Then we're going to look back, see how it worked, and if it worked, great. If it didn't, then we'll switch. So, people are becoming much more accustomed to formats of series, box sets, Games of Thrones, they like binge listening to box sets. So, again, you don't have to just do a continuous set of podcasts. It could just be a body of work that sits up on iTunes for 10 episodes, and then you could do that every quarter or once a year. Podcasting doesn't have to be the traditional view that we've had of it since 2004. But definitely be consistent with your formats so that people recognize and understand what it is that they're actually listening to. And when they get too familiar with you, I've listened to some podcasts for probably 5-6 years. And the ones that I've stopped listening to are the people that have just switched to a different format or have become sort of unfamiliar to me and just didn't resonate with me, and they totally lost all their listeners. So it's important to be consistent for sure. And distributing your podcasts, this is the magic of podcasting. Podcasts are scalable. When you put out a new podcast, it will automatically be distributed to all of the places that you put your RSS feed into. iTunes is obviously the biggest untapped audience channel for content marketers, but you can put it into your website with widgets. You can put it on iTunes, Stitcher Radio. There's directories like UK Podcasters. You've got Google Play, and there are many, many more. Player FM. You can plug your podcast into it, and you can literally publish your podcast once on your host, and it gets distributed out to all of these people all at once, which means you don't have to spend all of the time going around and individually posting stuff everywhere. There's so many new networks, apps, and aggregators. Too many to list here. But yeah, automatic distribution makes it very easy to get your message out. Listeners can just subscribe and get the latest episodes automatically. And one of the great advantages, and I'm not sure whether I should be saying this at Google, is that there's no Google penalization for duplicate podcast content. Basically, if you put a blog out and you repurpose that same content to many, many different blogs, and post it all over the web, Google actually rank you down for duplicate content, content in many places at once. But if you've got podcast content, they're not going to rank you down. You can be heard in many places and it won't affect people's ability to hear you. And podcast and audio is really easy to share on social media now, thanks to apps like Clamour. This is a very little known app. I'm just so surprised about how very few people know about this app. We interviewed the founder of Clamour, Pepe, on one of our podcasts. And it was phenomenal because he's basically made an app where you can pull in your podcast feed in one click and take a snippet, 24 seconds I think it is now, it used to be 18 seconds, and press share on Twitter and Facebook, and it clips like a little snippet of your audio and shares it onto Facebook as a native, or Twitter as a native little audio file. People can listen to it directly in timelines. So now podcasts are becoming shareable just like any other content. And a quick success story, and we're going to hear some more great stories in a moment. This was Josh Cobb from Steps, which is a real estate marketing agency. He had some key wins when he started his podcast up back in 2012, I believe it was. He gained 25,000 plays in the first 8 months of launching his small business. He said himself he would not have got that sort of coverage on a blog. He certainly wouldn't have got that many clicks and visitors in the first 8 months, starting from scratch. He used it as a successful lead generation channel to attract new customers. He got some great feedback for really directing his products and services. He wanted to find out what people wanted. And he actually covered the cost of his podcast through getting somebody else in his industry to just support his first, I think it was his first 10 to 12 episodes. He just went to somebody who was in an ancillary business and said, why don't we just promote you? And it covered the cost of him setting up his podcast. So, he bought his mics on other people's money. So it didn't cost anything in his business, so his budgets didn't increase. And he got a lot of speaking engagements based on his podcast as well. People heard his authority, people heard what he was talking about, they found out about his knowledge, and they invited him to speak at a number of events. So those were real wins for Josh on that. So really, the untapped opportunity conclusions really are that we've got a fast rising mass listenership that's only going to get bigger year on year. We've got an unsaturated landscape for publishers. I mean, there are gaps all over iTunes, if you're looking at iTunes, in all categories. And that really equals a window of opportunity for content marketers. And really, in the podcasting community, there is really some thought that the next year is going to be the key area for the UK. It's going to be the window of opportunity for the UK, where really it's a land grab. If you can get in now into podcasting, then you're probably going to be ahead of the game for the next 2 years. So for some more resources, if you want to find out some more, you can obviously listen to our podcast at podcastpowermarketing.com. It's also on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. And we also have a course as well at Podcast Power Blueprint. If anybody wants to learn how to podcast, then we have a course available as well. Or you can just join us on Twitter at our handle at New Rise Digital. So that's all about podcasting and why it's fun, great, and it's going to be a massive opportunity for content marketers in the next year. But what I want to do is introduce our panel now for taking a few questions. We have a few questions here from people who've submitted them already. So we're going to go through just a few of those. And where are we now? It's about 10:30. So we'll also be able to take some questions from the panel as well. But yeah, just a round of applause for the guys on the panel who are going to share their expertise. So Ben, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about what you do, a bit about your book and everything that you do?
Sure. So I joined The Guardian back in 2006. I've been, my background is in live radio, live commercial radio actually. I worked for LBC making some news shows and phoning, some good, some bad. I then went to Channel 4 News. They were in the process of launching Channel 4 Radio. I worked for Channel 4 News. We were piloting the Channel 4 Radio morning show. Channel 4 Radio never launched in the end in 2008, so it was far too expensive. I also freelanced for 5 Live and Talk Sport. So my background is in speech radio, and I was listening to The Guardian. They were making their own podcasts at the time. Ricky Gervais show, the World Cup show. It's about 2006. And I got in touch with them and said, really like what you're doing, but I think it could be much better. And they said, well, we're about to advertise for 2 jobs, so keep in touch. I advertised, I got one of them, and I've been there ever since. Now, the one show that I make now is Football Weekly, which is the UK's most successful sports podcast. That's twice a week. We get about 1.4 million listeners every month. We do tours around the UK now. We're about to play a live show in the London Palladium, which is sold out, 1,900 tickets. We do documentary interview strands as well, but it is fundamentally a twice a week football show. Football I'm interested in, but it is not my be all and end all. However, this is by far and away our most successful show to a very particular portion of 18 to 36-year-old men. I am a bit of a celebrity as producer Ben, but it's great fun. I also commission and executive produce a lot of audio content as well. For The Guardian, we're about to start a sport and comedy podcast during the summer with Andy Zaltzman, who you may know from the Bugle podcast. And I wrote a book last autumn called Podcast Master, which was not my title, but it's a very nice brand. The publishers have a master series, and I did the podcast version of that, and they have a video master, a webinar master, etc. So that's, unfortunately, you've missed it being 99p on Amazon and iTunes through the month of August. It's gone up to $3.99 again. There's also a free, abridged, though enhanced audio version that's on iTunes as a podcast. So you've got everything about the history of podcasting, production tips, presentation tips, all the equipment you need, what to listen to, why, how to make money from your podcast, and the future of audio. So that is called Podcast Master. Plug. Good stuff. Good. Back to The Guardian again. So like I said, they started in about 2005 making their podcast. And after they hired me, they really wanted to expand their audio remit. And at peak in 2009, we had 8 full-time audio producers. And we were making about 15 hours of unique original content each week. And we wanted to make the best radio that wasn't on the radio and give The Guardian a voice. We have, apart from the football show, we've got Science Weekly, Politics Weekly, Books Weekly, Tech Weekly, a media show, a music show, and a long read show. So a lot of different content. Not all of it's worked. We had a daily news show, which is not successful as an on-demand audio format. We've had an environment show, religion shows as well. So lots of things have come and gone, but the core of our weekly shows have stayed. and Football Weekly is, as I said, by far and away the most successful, but we get about 2 and a bit million listeners, that's downloads and streams, every month. The majority of those listeners are from the UK, but we get huge listeners from America and Australia as well. And particularly, I'll speak from my experience at Football Weekly, Simon's mentioned the words engagement, loyalty, relationships, those sort of things. You know, we've had people, I've been listening to Football Weekly since it began, before I was working on it myself. We've had people listening to the show for 10 years. It's its 10th anniversary this summer for the Euro Championships. And they've stuck with us throughout the whole time. They come to our live shows, they listen to absolutely everything we do, and they are very quick to criticise us or praise us. They are hugely engaged. And in terms of The Guardian, there are loads and loads of those listeners, particularly the young men who don't read the newspaper, but they'll come into the website, listening to the show and have a look around what else we're doing with football content, and then they'll go elsewhere on the site and read something else. But in terms of buying the paper itself, they will listen to Football Weekly as its own brand. It doesn't have to be a Guardian brand per se. And we're selling out the London Palladium is very bizarre, but an indication of how well we've done. We've done 15 shows around the UK. We're doing our first live show in America in October, and we're able to sell these out. The Guardian's business strategy, you may have seen that we accidentally lost or spent £80 million last year, and for every year I've been there, there have been unsustainable losses, but I think they're pretty unsustainable now. But our new business model, because we don't put a paywall around our content, podcasts are free and regular, which is very important. The business model now is to monetize our membership, and that means we want people to come to our live events and our live talks with journalists and masterclasses. And Football Weekly is the most successful of all of their live shows. It sells out quicker than anything. It does bigger venues. It makes more money. We took £14,000 at the bar on our first live show in London. So, there is money to be made in podcasting in various ways.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. Brilliant. We'll come back to you with some. I've got a couple of questions on that as well,
sure,
which is really interesting. But Max, do you want to tell guys what you do as well?
Certainly, yes, absolutely. Great presentation, by the way, Simon. It was excellent. So I'm representing and founded a company called Rebelhead Entrepreneurs. So my background was in music, and then in 2012 I started a media agency. And I had a commute to my job, running this media agency, of 45 minutes every day. Now, prior to running this, I was a fairly young MD at this time, and I didn't really feel confident as a business leader. So I can honestly say that podcasting changed my life, because to and from work every single day, I would listen to podcasts. And it was a very busy job, a very stressful job, and I didn't necessarily have the time to be able to carve out reading business books and whatever. So 45 minutes to and from work every single day was really quite a lot of education time, and I can honestly, sincerely, wholeheartedly say that it changed my life, because the sort of podcasts I'd listen to would be about business, would be about entrepreneurial stories. It really did help. Now, what happened at the end of last year, I decided that because I came from the music world and then ran a very successful business, my own insecurities of being a business leader led me to think there must be other people out there that feel the same. So that, coupled with the fact that the 21st century has seen a monumental shift in the world of business, right? Traditional industries are being shaken to their very core by startups and entrepreneurs that seem to appear as if from nowhere. A lovely analogy I heard of the music industry, we all know how that is now struggling, was imagine that you used to sell diamonds, and it was a very profitable business, and you were an expert in that market. And suddenly your audience that you used to, or your market, your consumers who you used to sell diamonds to, can now stick their hands under a computer, push a button, and fill their palms with diamonds for free. That is that's symbolic of what's now happening, or what has happened to the music industry. And the thing is, we look at the music industry and we think to ourselves, yeah, they should have been more dexterous or been more forward-thinking and anticipated this happening. And now they are, of course, and we can see the whole model changing. But the thing is, this is symbolic of what's happening in business all over the place. It's happened to the music industry, but it's about to happen or is happening to every other industry known to man. So Rebelhead Entrepreneurs is here to talk about that very subject, talk about innovative creators, entrepreneurs, business leaders, people who are on the cusp of innovation, who are disrupting industries. And it's really to represent this entire movement in the way of business, the way that business and entrepreneurship is changing. So it's a media platform. So what we're trying to do with Rebelhead Entrepreneurs, what we aim to do, is become the antithesis of Forbes magazine or Business Insider. Old school business magazines that are still perceived as being fairly stiff-collared and don't talk to rebellious, disruptive, innovative, creative, millennial entrepreneurs who understand that the future of enterprise, business and career lies in the opportunities presented by disruption and innovation. So we're interviewing a wide spectrum of incredible individuals, from global CEOs to fascinating entrepreneurs who are winning 30 under 30 lists, to award-winning movie directors. Because if you actually observe worlds that aren't necessarily connected usually, like we interviewed the director of the remake of The Crow, who won an Empire Award last month. Now if you talk to him about his business, his art, from the mindset of an entrepreneur, and you talk about the way that he's had to sacrifice a steady career path, get investment for his films, there are things that we can all learn from this. So that's the idea of Rebelhead Entrepreneurs. It's a media platform, podcast and digital magazine. But we are leading with the podcast. It could very well have been a publication digital magazine first, but the flagship product, if you like, is the podcast, because everything that Simon has said, the way you can cut through the noise, the way you can build 1,000 true fans, real engaged audience, and essentially reverse engineer absolutely everything you want to do. The way you can listen to your audience and build a community and therefore ask them questions that they'll answer, ask them what their problems are, which you can then solve commercially. And just as Ben said, that once you've got that audience, it's very monetizable. Traditional models like The Guardian have proved, our old school models are changing, and really building an audience first is what it's all about. Because then you get the trust, you get to know what people want, and you can have events, you can have clubs, you can have courses, you can have products that solve actual problems rather than relying on hypotheses. So that's what Rebelhead Entrepreneurs do. We're a 3-day-a-week podcast coupled with a digital magazine. It's incredibly labour intensive at this point. We are literally throwing everything we have into it 7 days a week, 24/7 pretty much, to produce content, interview people. But that is what we're all about.
Cool, thanks.
Sam here.
And Mark from Eventbrite, he's the head of content marketing at Eventbrite. Now you've had some different experiences, haven't you? And it was great because Mark actually sent me a little email and just said, you know, I'm struggling with things like Blab and podcasting and stuff like that. Do you really want me to come along? And I said, yeah, because I want everybody's perspective of it. Because, as Max said, podcasting is quite labour intensive. It does mean it's an investment of time. You know, there aren't any quick and easy fixes. You have to sit down and do the work. But that goes for any content. And Mark actually recently won the Blog Awards. Was that correct for your blog?
Yes.
So he can attest to the amount of work he had to do to put into that. Because I know him personally, and I know you've got a lot of work into that. So congratulations on that, Mark. It's the first time I had a chance to congratulate you on that. But you actually started recently a very similar thing to podcasting called Blab, which is, for anybody who doesn't know about it, is basically an online community platform where you can just switch on like Skype, but with effectively 4 or more people in a room. And you started on Blab to try and build the content out differently for Eventbrite, if I'm right. So.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been really successful running a blog in a kind of traditional magazine media way, very much text based. But I'm always keen to diversify and reach new audiences. And one thing that I've found is you're right, like text is primarily a one-way medium, people will share it. We can sometimes have a conversation through social media based around that post, but it's fundamentally kind of a one-way interaction. I really want to build up more engagement with our audience. So I thought, start of this year, we'll try Blab. It sounded exciting, I love trying and playing with new tools. I thought we'll do exactly kind of what you said, we'll compartmentalize it into like a series, and we'll do it for a quarter and see how it works. And I was very excited. I was like, right, consistency is key, so we'll do it at the exact same time every week, same day, same time every week. Got some great guests on there, and I felt that the content was really good, and I really enjoyed doing it. And one of the unexpected benefits was we connected with some amazing people across the events industry that we wouldn't have otherwise, and those relationships have built out, and we've had some great additional things come out of those. But the actual Blab itself, we really struggled to build an audience. So over 12 weeks, we just couldn't get more than 50 people, I think was our most successful one. Whereas a blog post, for us, because we've really built that medium up, we'll get hundreds, if not thousands of views from one post. So at the end of the quarter, I made a difficult decision, which was we could continue, but it takes, it is time intensive if you want to do it well. Like if you want to reach out to people and work with them and curate the topics and make sure that they're comfortable and promote it properly and all that kind of stuff, it does become quite time intensive. So it wasn't the quick on the side thing that I was hoping it would be. It was taking quite a bit of time, and the opportunity cost was we couldn't do the stuff we knew worked. But
can I ask you about you said about the connections that you made?
Yeah.
Like, how else could you have made those connections other than something like Blab?
Yeah, I honestly, so we reach out to guest bloggers and get them to write for us, and we make some connections that way, but it's not the same. It wasn't the same because you're not having a conversation with them. So I don't know of a better medium, and I nearly continued it purely on that basis of it's a great way to reach out to people that we wouldn't otherwise get a conversation with. And now retrospectively, and honestly, like listening to your presentation, like, oh, I'm kind of fired up again. I think we should have another stab at this. And if we did it again, there's two things that so Blab, great platform, free, highly recommend you check it out. The one element that it's missing is an ability to tell people that, like, there and then you've signed up for this, now come along to it. So if anyone's familiar with webinars, God, you have it's all very well getting someone to say sign up for it, but you have to prod them again and again, a week before, a day before, an hour before them, to get them to actually turn up. And Blab doesn't quite have that functionality.
Have you got any app developers here? No. Okay. No. We'll go downstairs to Google data on enough to build that app.
I think so. So you need some sort of ability, and this isn't quite the same for on-demand podcasts, but for a live conversation, you need to tell people it's live now, and ideally get it in their inboxes where they're going to see it. And then the other thing is, just very quickly, is as you've done with The Guardian, is building up a distinct subscriber base for your podcast or for your people that really believe in that format and want that format. Whereas we were kind of just promoting it as we would anything else to the general newsletter, and we needed to build up a subscriber base on iTunes, etc.
So have you thought about repurposing the Blab? Like literally taking the audio from the Blab and putting it on iTunes as a podcast? Because so many people do that, is that they have these live conversations, and even if they don't have the audience there, you can just strip out the audio from your video and put it up as a series podcast on iTunes, and there you go, you've got access to a brand new audience instantly. Yeah. So I mean, if you were thinking of starting a podcast, you already have probably how many 10 episodes?
Yeah, we've got dozen episodes.
Most people launch with 3 or 1. So you're ahead of the game. Brilliant, thanks, Mark. We've got a couple of questions. We've still got about 5-6 minutes just to go through some of these. One of the key things I wanted to ask you, Ben, was I recently saw a report. I don't know if you saw this, but one of the Northern Clubs, can't remember what it was, but one of a really popular podcast up in the north of England actually gets paid subscribers for their podcast because it's so popular. Have you ever thought of going down that route since you have such an engaged podcast?
Well, The Guardian, as I've said, doesn't believe in a paywall. However, we have advertising on our podcast and we do make money in a very simple advertising model. There are a couple of podcasting apps, one called Acast, based actually around the corner from here, who will inject dynamic ads into your podcast as well as hosting it, and they'll do a profit share with you on that. Now, to make money on podcasts, you need to have a big audience and a loyal subscription base, as we've discussed. You also have to have fantastic content, because people aren't, people will put up with an advert because listening to a lot of the American shows, they'll do live reads, presented reads at the beginning. But generally the first 7 minutes or so of a show is a sort of housekeeping and then reading the various sponsors. And when the presenter themselves read it, that's very powerful. You can charge a higher rate for that as opposed to a produced ad break as such. But people will put up with that because podcasting they see as a free piece of content. But so if you're doing a business podcast or an entrepreneurial podcast like you are, that you can charge for something like that, I believe, because you are offering a service. You're offering share advice, business tips, self-help, something like that. And you only have to make that micropayment. That only has to be 99p. Or you subscribe to a whole season for $3.99, something like that. So it's not a lot of money, but that's probably your more successful way of making revenue as opposed to advertising initially to start with. And as we said as well, then you can lead to sessions like this where you charge your listeners to come and see you or interact with you. There are various services as described in and episode 6 of the audio, which is already available, and that's great.
And I've got a question for you, Max. You turned up with a suitcase today. You could actually go around and actually physically, rather than maybe set up an interview on Skype and record that audio, which is what most people do to start out their interviews on a podcast. And a podcast doesn't have to be an interview show, by the way. If you've got a whole bunch of knowledge, it can just be you speaking into a microphone and sharing that knowledge as if you were speaking to somebody. So it's not the only format, but you definitely bring all your kit around. One of the questions we got from one of the attendees was about how do you get a good recording studio? You actually take a recording studio on the road.
Yes, what we do, if we're interviewing someone that makes it geographically impossible to be in front of them, of course Skype is great. But we are really aiming for a broadcast quality show. We want something that dispels the perceived myth that podcasting is all about shitty, crappy recordings, and as good as that can be, don't get me wrong, like there's some, it's not absolute necessity, but for our brand, we really want it to be broadcast quality. So we try to get interviews in front of people. There's nothing quite like being able to look at someone in the eyes and have a chat and a coffee, and the interview is just generally more compelling that way. So over there, I've got a little wheelie suitcase where I take stuff around, and my lovely colleague Matt here, who is the exec producer for Rebelhead, we have a place in London where we record, or we go to people and we just record them in their office or a quiet room. And it might sound scary or difficult if you have no experience of it, but it genuinely is very simple. There's a couple of mics. Essentially plug it into a computer and we're pretty much good to go. And there's lots of different avenues and ways you can go about it. They're very simple, so if anyone wants to ask, I know Simon has loads of knowledge, if anyone wants to get in touch with myself or Matt, we'll be more than happy to help out in that respect. But yeah, that's really why. It's just we wanted to make ours good quality, and personally there's just something about being able to be in the same room with someone that we quite like.
Yeah. And going back to what I was saying earlier, you can also just buy a lightning connector mic, plug it straight into your iPhone. So you could also just literally have a handheld mic on your iPhone and record straight into your iPhone, because the iPhone is such a powerful, or even an Android device, it's such a powerful device in your pocket. You've got a recording studio in your pocket as well. So it doesn't have to be as complicated as that, but if that's your brand, and that's what you're doing, then that's an option as well. Many podcasters, once they get into this, get a little bit geeky and get really deep into it, because it's a fascinating topic. I can take probably one more question. Has anybody got a burning question from the audience about anything that you've heard today? If not, I'll go to one more question then, which is, in terms of business to business, I know you're really probably a business to consumer brand, would you say? Have you ever done any business to business broadcasting or podcasting? Or?
Yeah, we do. We have excuse me. We have kind of a branded content division at The Guardian now called G Labs. So we do commission things based on a remit from the client. We've done things with Skoda, done things with Sky Atlantic and Netflix as well. So they exist there, but they live slightly off platform with The Guardian. As you know, native advertising is slightly problematic, particularly when you are very lefty liberal organisation like The Guardian. But yes, we do that. Other podcast companies like Dunant in America, they do that. Slate do that as well. So that is a good way of making money. But that's more for a producer. So for you guys, I suppose it's the opportunity for you is to approach producers and get that done and then distribute it somewhere.
Okay, brilliant. Well, if nobody's got any other questions, then great. I want to thank Ben Green, Max Pepe, and Mark Walker. Thank you lot for coming as well. It's been great to see you. If you want to follow up with any of the guys, we'll probably have about 5 minutes while we're rearranging the room. If you want to have a chat with anybody, just come and have a quick chat with me. Then great. And you can follow all the people here on their Twitter accounts. And yeah, I'd love to see some of you guys starting the podcast. And really taking advantage of the opportunities. You've got basically a year window where I think we're going to be a bit more saturated in 2 years' time. If we're sitting here in 2 years' time, we'll probably have some of you guys sitting on the panel, hopefully, talking about how we've had the podcasting journey for the last 2 years. So thanks very much for coming. I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic.